What's a fat? Well, fats or lipids do lots of things. They're energy storage, they give structure to cells, they base in hormones, vitamins, all these things. Thermal insulation, what does that mean? This is an example of thermal insulation. Nerve impulse conduction, turns out that you actually couldn't move a single muscle without fat. It helps to protect our nerves and helps us to transmit nervous signals. They're extremely important in our bodies and do all sorts of things. Now, in excess, like anything, they can be dangerous, right? So we have to think about this. Lipids are hydrophobic. Phobic meaning that they hate water, right? So why are they so important for our bodies then if they don't play well with water and we are so much made up of water? Well, it turns out that particularly for you, we look at them as a long-term energy storage solution because they don't get broken down easily by water. They don't go through hydrolysis reactions very easily, and in that case, it's going to actually allow us to store energy more longer term. And when we do break it down, we're actually going to get much more energy out of it. Turns out that fats contain about twice as much energy, pound for pound, as sugars. The problem is it takes us a lot to break them down, right? It's very, very hard for us to get in there and get the energy out that we need. Most of our fats are actually put together by what we call nonpolar covalent bonds. We talked about these in the biochemistry section. If you didn't see that or don't remember talking about those, go back and look at that. You'll need to know what a nonpolar covalent bond is. Lipids are different from our carbohydrates and the proteins and nucleic acids that we're going to talk about because they're actually not very big. They're macromolecules by definition, but they're not very large. And they're actually not built from a single monomer. So in our sugars, we saw that our monomer was glucose, or in our carbohydrates, we saw our monomer was glucose. In proteins, we'll see it's amino acids. And in nucleic acids, we'll see that it's nucleotides. These are all the monomers. Lipids, they don't have this. We have a couple of different types of lipids, and based on that, their structures are very, very different. So there's no generic structure of a fat like we see with other macromolecules. Instead, we're going to look at classes of lipids. And their functions change based on the class that they're categorized in. So we have three major classes or types of lipids: triglycerides, phospholipids, and steroids. So triglycerides are the majority of the fats that we eat in our diet. And they're made up of two smaller molecules that are still polymers. So to actually build these lipids, we're going to use polymers, put polymers together to build them. So when we look at triglycerides, we're actually going to look at glycerol plus what we call fatty acids. Phospholipids will see the same similar structure, slightly different. Phospholipids are part of every single cell in your body. Steroids, this doesn't necessarily mean the bodybuilding steroids, okay? Cholesterol in your body we often associate with being bad. Cholesterol does not have to be bad. We'll look at what we call low-density lipoproteins. It's one type of cholesterol. And high-density lipoproteins, the second type of cholesterol. We'll actually look at how HDL is the good cholesterol and LDL is the bad cholesterol. Good cholesterol, this is found in every cell membrane in your body. So you're starting to see that fats are found throughout your body regardless of how heavy you are. That has nothing to do with it. Fats are found throughout your body regardless of any other skeletal fat structures that we see. So with our lipids, we're actually going to look at putting these fatty acids plus a glycerol together through a dehydration reaction, just like we have before. So dehydration reactions are not just used for adding monomers together. We can actually use them as well for building complex polymers. So when we look at these, we take this glycerol, we add a fatty acid, and you see we give off water, so this is a dehydration reaction. Okay. In building this, to build a triglyceride, tri is 3, so we're actually going to build this with 3 fatty acid tails. So this is a triglyceride. A glycerol plus 3 fatty acids gives you this. So you see that this structure is very linear. Okay. Why might that be so important? Well, when we look at triglycerides, our concern with them is that they clog your arteries. They are also what make French fries taste amazing, but they clog your arteries. So we have to think about their role in how they behave in your body. They clog your arteries because they tend to stick together. They almost look like the structural compounds we were looking at in carbohydrates, right? Very long and skinny and stackable. Well, this is a problem because if they start to stack together too much, we end up with all of these clogging up your arteries, and then you can't circulate blood properly. So when we build these, in some cases you have these very straight tails, and in this case you have what we call a kinked tail. Why is this tail kinked? Why is it different than the other two? Right here. There's a double bond carbon. The rest of them on the straight ones are all single bond carbons. This is critical to the functioning and how your body is going to recognize this fat. So when we talk about those kinks in the fatty acid tails, we're actually looking at what we call an unsaturated fatty acid. If you look at the nutrition labels on your food, there is a breakdown. You will see unsaturated fats and saturated fats. Unsaturated fats have these kinks or bends associated with them, and these are actually better for you because they reduce the packing together of the fatty acids. They're not going to stack together as well. Saturated fatty acids, on the other hand, have all the hydrogens, which means they have single bonds between the carbons for all of them, like we saw in those straight tails, and they pack very tightly. So this is why we're concerned about saturated fatty acids in particular, because they pack together so tight. And here's an example. Saturated fatty acids tend to have a higher melting point, so they tend to be solid at room temperature, as opposed to unsaturated fatty acids, which have a lower melting point. They pack very loosely with double bonds, and they tend to be a liquid at room temp. Now, yes, I understand you can melt butter. I get that. It's still a fatty acid because under normal conditions, we are looking at it as being a solid, meaning that in many cases in you, if they started to stack together, they would be solid. Okay? So when we look at these fats, corn and olive oil and so on, like we mentioned, tend to be liquid at room temperature, plant-based. But most animal fats are saturated fats and tend to be solid at room temperature. If we actually removed your fat, it would be solid at room temperature. Now we can take liquid fats. we can take these unsaturated fats and make them saturated. How would we do that? What was the tail of that straight fatty acid saturated with? What was it full of? Hydrogen. So we can take, through the power of chemistry, we can take a liquid unsaturated fat, add hydrogens, and make it a saturated fat solid at room temperature. Now, we're concerned because this makes what we call trans fats, and it turns out they're not so good for us. But they exist, we use them, they're yummy in many cases. So we care about this saturated and unsaturated fat, as I said, because of this cholesterol thing in particular. We said HDL was good cholesterol. This is going to be found when we talk about cells in every single cell wall. LDL, as we mentioned, is the bad cholesterol. This is the one that clogs your arteries, causes heart attacks and strokes and so on. So when we look at these, the biggest thing that we are concerned about is these saturated fats that are broken down and stored as low-density lipoproteins, or LDL cholesterol. So when we store them like this, these are huge contributors to dietary cholesterol. So if you have high cholesterol, or know someone who does, they're going to be told to avoid saturated fats. As sad as that is, they must be avoided because we worry about this building up in your arteries, causing a stroke, and so on. Monounsaturated fats actually are very, very interesting because they're unsaturated, but they're only unsaturated at that one spot, okay? So we actually, that one kink in the tail that we looked at, turns out that these are really, really good at lowering the LDL without impacting your HDL. So these are saturated, monounsaturated fats are very interesting in the diet. Things like olive oil fall into this category. So when they say fats are bad for you, but some aren't as bad as others, this is what we're talking about.